the heart and soul behind every business. Stories. Welcome to Business Story of the Week, hosted by me, Joshua Laurie. From setbacks to comebacks, from tragedies to triumphs, we inspire entrepreneurs through conversations that matter. Witness the magic that turns dreams into reality. Whether it's your career, business, or life, your success is always one story away. This is Business Story of the Week.
Hello, I'm AJ Jacobs, and welcome to Business Story of the Week.
Fantastic. That is the man himself, AJ, the puzzling man himself, the puzzler himself. But he's not going to be a mystery for us today. He is going to share his insight and wisdom with us. And today, of course, I'm your host. As always, we always kick this show off with a riveting question. And it's quite an odd. I try to start the question of the show uniquely, Today's question is, what if we all tried to live exactly like our founding fathers? Well, Jacob, AJ, I feel like has an interesting answer to that. But more than that, he's a perfect guest to delve deep into our topics for today. AJ Jacob is a best-selling author, journalist, and self-proclaimed human guinea pig. Known for his immersive, humorous experiments, his works, including Know It All and The Year of Living Biblically, they blend memoir, science, and self improvement, and have made him a TED Talk speaker with over 10 million views. His latest book is The Year of Living Constitutionally, where he explores America's founding document in a deeply personal way. And today, he is also, of course, the host of The Puzzler with AJ Jacobs, a daily podcast produced by iHeartMedia, in which he gives short, audio-friendly puzzles to celebrity guests, including American satirist and author Adam Felber. Sorry, but yes, the puzzler himself is here with us today. AJ, thank you so much for being on here. How are you doing?
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. Delighted to be here.
Well, AJ, you we need to address that first of all. The human guinea pig. You created your branding around this sort of experimentation, like an experimentation in life, how to constantly self experiment. But before we get into that, I want to frame it in that question first of all. What was a young AJ Jacobs like? What was a young AJ Jacobs when it comes to the idea of self experimentation? Was he always curious? Was this always a part of your personality?
It was. I have been a fan of experimentation since the beginning.
Wow.
And my experiments as a kid were not necessarily very sophisticated. They would be things like, can I combine the sugar cereal with gravy and eat that? And what would that taste like? Didn't taste great. So, but I always thought, let's try something new, see whether it's good, whether it's bad, and what the takeaways are.
Well, that's the thing. You probably wouldn't have learned that it tastes bad without trying it, right? I think that's part of
That's right.
self experimentation. But you put yourself in these things. The human guinea pig. Of course, that was when you were a child. I'm now interested in what you have to put yourself through now as an adult when it comes to all these self experimentation. But AJ, what is the inspiration behind this? Why the self experimentation aspect? A sense of self improvement, a sense of self discovery, and what have are these self experimentations that you've done now as an adult?
Yeah, absolutely. Both of those self-improvement, self-discovery, curiosity. I'm a huge fan. It's my favorite human drive, curiosity. And I have been doing this for 20 years or more, maybe 25. And I've done everything. I wrote a book where I lived by all the rules of the Bible for a year. So that was not just the 10 Commandments, but it also had the hundreds of rules in the Old Testament. You can't shave the corners of your beard, the Bible says. I didn't know where the corners were, so I just let the whole thing grow, and I looked like Gandalf. I did another experiment where I tried to be the most grateful person alive. So I went around the world and thanked every single person who had anything to do with my morning cup of coffee, because there are there's the barista in my cafe, but there's also the farmer, the truck driver. The truck driver couldn't have driven those coffee beans without the road, so I thanked the people who made the road. And it was just a wonderful experiment in how to be grateful and notice the good things that happen all the time that we take for granted.
Wow, I love that. And of course, this, I feel like your life has been peppered with all that experimentation. But I'm quite curious as well, is that one of your books, of course, is The Year of Living Biblically. And you've experimented on that aspect of it as well. And you're now also have a book, like your most recent book is The Year of Living Constitutionally. And these are very interesting aspect because how do you, how do you live experimentally in those aspects? The Bible biblically is very, very rigid. How do you experiment around that? The Constitution too has its set of rules. Like, I feel like there's no room for experimentation. Having done both or having written about both, how do you confront more unexpected, like, modern day challenges when it comes to experimentations? How did these experiences differ when it comes to experimentation? And really, how did you navigate both aspects that seems to be rigid but still experiment around it?
Yeah, great question. I think that actually structure sometimes makes creativity easier. If you are given blank piece of paper and say, yeah, write a short story, that's quite hard to do. But if you're given some real structures, write a short story from the point of view of an inanimate object. Write a
Of
story
course.
from the point of view of a toaster. Then you actually have something to work with. So I do feel that having these strict structures actually makes me more creative. And for the Constitution, for instance, the experiment was, what if I tried to adopt the mindset of the 1700s and the technology? What would be the good of that, and what is the bad? There was a lot of bad back then. It was racist and sexist. You don't want that. But there were also some first of all, writing with a quill pen.
Of
Writing with
course.
a quill pen
Very
was
cool.
it was very cool, but it changed the way my brain worked because I
Interesting.
was offline. I was not being assaulted with these dings and chimes and baldness cure ads. I was able to focus. And I'm not saying everyone should write with a quill, but I am saying it's important for any business person or creative person to think and write offline. So write with a pen, write with a pencil, or just turn off your computer. And that's the sort of takeaway I like. You do some things that are ridiculous and hard, and like carrying around a musket in New York City, that I don't need to continue doing. But
Fortunately.
yes, yes, I don't recommend it, but I do recommend takeaways like thinking offline. And if the founding fathers had tried to write the Constitution on a Google Doc, I don't think we would have a country.
I don't think we would have a country. I truly agree. A Google Doc, I don't think we would have had the same level of diligence, the same level of structure, the same level of detail, right? And intention if it were all digital. Of course, it has its uses, right? But I think I love that you've reiterated in there that it's not always going to help you in all different aspects of life because some aspects, some things in life just takes a degree of just going offline, disconnecting, and connecting to the fundamentals of what makes us unique as humans and what makes us unique as ourselves. And the self-experimentation, I feel like, has allowed you to discover more of that, discover more of what makes us unique, what makes us strong, and in the same time, allow us to just think outside the box as well. AJ, of course,
Agree,
you're
yeah.
you're the puzzler. You have this podcast, the host of the daily podcast, The Puzzler, with AJ Jacobs. We talked a little bit about your board games behind you prior to this interview. AJ, if life were a jigsaw puzzle or a board game, really one of your favorite board games perhaps, the corner pieces or the elements in the game, where would you place the corner pieces of your journey and how do they guide the rest of the pieces?
That's a lovely question. Well, first of all, let me back up and say one reason I love this question is I think it is very helpful to view life as a puzzle. And there was a great quote. No, now I'm forgetting the name of the producer, Quincy Jones. Quincy
Quincy Jones.
Jones, a great music producer. He has a quote. His life philosophy is, I don't have problems, I have puzzles. So whether it's a financial, a business, a marital, he says, let's reframe it as a puzzle because puzzles are solvable. It's more inspiring and motivating, and it takes creativity. So that I find very helpful in business and in life, framing things as a puzzle. Uh, so yeah, as for the corners of the puzzle, I guess the, sort of the most important pieces, we talked about some of them: gratitude, creativity, trying to have a purpose, and trying to help others. I am a big fan of trying to help others because by helping others, you actually make yourself happier. I think it's a paradoxical if you try to pursue your own happiness and that's all you care about, you are going to be less happy because you're so obsessed with it. But if you try to say, I'm going to get purpose and meaning from helping others, that paradoxically makes you happier. And that
Absolutely.
I'm old, so it took me a long time to learn that.
But also, I mean, but validated the truth that has been around in that the more you help others, you actually help yourself as well. In fact, you could even argue that you actually help yourself more than you're actually helping others because then you're discovering these parts of yourself that you're not capable of. You're strengthening, your core values, and in turn, by helping others, you're actually helping others more because that multiplies, right? If they pay it forward, then there's a residual effect, and that just helps us more along the way. And AJ, of course, your experience have been substantial. I want to talk a little bit about your Moth series, your talks on TED Talks, which has amassed 10 million views. By the way, for our audience and listeners who want to be familiar, the Moth.org is where there's stories, stories that AJ talks about on stage. One of the favorite ones that I've watched just before this interview is My Outsourced Life, which was very, it was quite very interesting. But AJ, where did this journey begin? You've done so much, a lot of moth stories. Where did this all begin, and how was this part of your self-experimentation?
Well, I started as strictly a writer, just writing, typing the words into the laptop. And I actually remember very early on my first radio interview. It was a local radio show, maybe in Northern California. And I was so nervous that I couldn't get the words out. I just
Oh,
started
well.
stumbling and they cut me off in the middle, like mid-sentence, because
Oh
I was going,
no!
ba, ba, ba.
Oh
And they're
no!
like, okay, thank you very much. That
Oh
was AJ Jacobs.
no!
Cut me off. And I was mortified. And so I said, you know what? This is a part of my job. Part of my job is marketing my writing. So I'm gonna try it again. I'm not gonna give up. And I just took any opportunity to go on a radio show or this was even before podcasts. But speak in front of 10 people, didn't matter. And I began to see it as a puzzle. Like, how can I speak in an interesting way? How can I vary my tone of voice? How can I vary, pausing? That's a big part of speaking. So I saw it as a puzzle that I'm going to crack. And I became a huge fan of it. And now I love giving talks in front of, I don't get nervous really. I will, let me rephrase this.
Please, please.
I get excited and which maybe is nervousness that I've reframed as excitement. And the
Okay.
one thing I don't, that is hard is the Moth and TED both say no notes. You have to do it all from your memory. That can be stressful, especially early on in TED's history. You had to talk for 18 minutes. Now they've realized people have shorter attention spans. Now
Yes,
it's
that's
down to like,
hilarious. Of course.
yeah, the TED Talks are now down to like 8 minutes, 12 minutes. So that's a little easier. But yeah, in general, I no longer am terrified. I am excited, and I like to. I also like the immediate feedback you get when you're talking to people. You know,
That's
when I
true. That is
write
true.
as a writer, if I'm writing a book, it won't come out for months. So there is something wonderful. And that actually is a very good strategy as a writer. I do try to read my stuff out loud to people to see how they react.
It's of course nice. It's a privilege. It must have been a great privilege and a great joy to just be able to tell your story immediately, like just
Mhm.
being up there and just getting to tell it to a lot of people. I love how you said, by the way, the immediate feedback, right? And not just feedback, with your friends and family who you read to, but a crowd. Right, and immediately they're amused. Immediately they're happy, and they're just that's great. It must feel great because stories, I love stories. It's literally the second title of this show, right? We love stories on here. And, talking about your stories, you've done a lot of self-experimentation, the human guinea pig, biblically, constitutionally. On your website, you also talk about thanks 1,000. You talked about this earlier as well, where you thanked everyone, who made your cup of coffee, so to speak. To get a glimpse of what you do, AJ, and to get a bit of story out of that as well, and to hear a story from you, basically. What was the most surprising moment in that journey when you did the thanks 1,000? When you did this gratitude experiment of yours, what was the most surprising moment in that journey, and how did it change your perspective on gratitude?
Yep, great question. There were a lot of surprising moments. I think one surprise was just how much the act of gratitude, of thanking people, changed the way I thought. Because I would wake up in a grumpy mood. We all humans are wired with this negative bias. We are just very good at seeing the negative, which had its evolutionary advantages way back when we were being chased by the tiger, but it's not very good for our mental health. So I would wake up in an annoyed mood, and I would force myself, all right, I'm going to call 10 people or visit or write 10 people and thank them for what they did to help me with my cup of coffee. So, for instance, I called there's the warehouse where the coffee beans are stored, a huge warehouse with millions of coffee beans. But there's also the exterminator, pest control person who keeps the bugs out of the. So I, out of the blue, called the exterminator and I said, I know this is strange, but I just want to thank you for keeping the insects out of my coffee. And she said, well, that is strange, but thank you. I don't get a lot of positive feedback in my job, so this is kind of making my day. And that in turn made my day. It was this positive, virtuous loop, and it was lovely. And that type of thing would get me out of my negative mood, make me feel good, more productive, get ready to actually do some work and do some writing.
Wow, I love that. And of course, again, these are the many experiments that you have done, of course. And to all our audience listeners out there, I feel like it's it's interesting, but it's also terrifying. Like what am I? I'm gonna go put myself out there. Thank people is one thing, but you to carry a musket around New York Times Square is a different kind of experiment. These are major, major experimentation that you have done and that you have written about. But AJ, you said like it's changed your perspective. It's giving you unique perspective on your journey and in life. But how do we approach experimentation personally in our own journeys? If we're someone who doesn't have the courage or gal that you have, so to speak, to experiment all of that, how can we experiment in little ways so we can discover more about ourselves and uncover parts of our lives that could only be found by trying?
Yeah, I love that question. And there are two things that come to mind. First, just what you said, little ways. I make my living doing these really big experiments because that's what makes a book. But I am an evangelist. I do it in little ways and as well. So it could just be trying a new toothpaste every month. It could be walking to work a different way. It could be spending a weekend without gossiping. These are little things, and they not only keep your life interesting, they not only keep your brain more flexible and that whole neuro flexibility, they might improve your life. You're going to find ones that you want to stick with. So that's big. That's the first point. Just try a lot of little experiments. Always have something running. The second is, you said that I have courage. Yes and no. I'm terrified and embarrassed by a lot of this, but what I do is what we discussed before, which is acting as if. I act as if I am bold and fearless, or I say, what would a bold and fearless person do? And then I do it. So it's that sort of fake it until you feel it. It's there's a great quote by a minister from the 19th century. He says, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than it is to think your way into a new way of acting. So it's easier to pretend to be courageous, and then you sort of become courageous. That's cognitive behavioral psychology talks about this, how your behavior affects your thoughts. So that's another thing. No one is fearless, and they shouldn't be. Fearlessness is probably a bad idea, right? You want to fear something, but being bold is something you can learn. You can teach yourself.
I love that. I love that. Fear and being bold. I think it's just very important to separate both. It's very important to define how they are different in such ways. We almost often aren't able to define that, and we feel like being fearless is being bold is just one and the same thing. But I think being bold doesn't, like you said, it doesn't mean that you're scared, you're terrified, you're mortified about the things that you do, and but they make for great stories. I love it. I love that you're the one to do these big things, but also remind us at the same time that we can also do them in small things. We can do these experimentations. We can look for things to improve ourselves. I mean, literally, one of your book titles is like "My Life as an Experiment." One man's
Right?
humble quest to improve himself, and it's like we can do those things as well. We can improve ourselves in little experimentations and all this. But AJ, you with your continued focus on puzzles and experiments and games, continuously, putting those, you know, puzzle pieces in our lives. What's the next for AJ Jacobs? Right? Like, how do you plan to continue to challenge yourself? How do you plan to experiment on yourself? Of course, you did this constitutional book. It's currently out, by the way, the newly released book. We're going to invite our audience and listeners to grab a copy of that. But of course, what's next? What's next for AJ Jacobs? You're going to challenge yourself, experiment yourselves, your readers as well. How would you move forward? What would be the next puzzle piece in AJ Jacobs?
Well, great question. I recently started a Substack that I'm really enjoying, and it's called Experimental Living with AJ Jacobs. So substack.com, whatever, subscribe, Experimental Living. But the idea is every week I write a free essay about an experiment I've done that week or in the past. I just wrote one actually this yesterday about boldness. It was about when I went on the Oprah Winfrey show and I was terrified, but I pretended I wasn't, and I made a little joke at her expense, and I couldn't believe I was saying it at the time, but it paid off. She was like that. Actually, she was kind of standoffish in the beginning, but when I kind of teased her, it turned things around. That is an experiment I'm loving, writing the Substack, and I do have that daily podcast called The Puzzler, which does keep me busy because it is a daily podcast.
I mean, I love that, of course. For all our audience and listeners out there, you can grab a copy of AJ's books, everything that we talked about and more that he has written at ajjacobs.com. You can go check that out as well. And of course, again, go check out AJ's Substack, substack.com/experimental living. Very, very, very interesting stuff. And AJ, I mean, this has been fascinating. Of course, I am quite honored to have you on the show. I was quite really excited, to have you on here. Thank you for sharing your experience, your wisdom, and your stories. One last bit of wisdom that you would love to leave behind the audience. What would it be?
That's How about this one? This is
Mm.
sort of in line with what we've been talking about, and I didn't make up this phrase. I got it from a child psychologist, but I think it applies to more than just raising kids. It
Mhm.
applies to work, it applies to life, it applies to marriage, and that is, don't get furious, get curious.
I
So
love that.
whenever you have the urge to get angry and say, how could they have not clicked, why didn't my Instagram post go viral? I'm so angry. Instead, get curious. Why didn't it go viral? What could I do to change? How can I experiment? So that's just a nice little phrase that I try to keep in my mind. Don't get furious, get curious. And also, I just want to thank you for this experiment in podcasting and business story of the week. And I'm delighted to be a part of it.
Well, the pleasure is mine, AJ, and to all our audience and listeners out there. I hope they enjoyed this episode. I certainly did. I mean, again, I'm honored. You have quite the repertoire, the books and the TED Talk and all that, but more importantly, the stories and the lessons that we take from those stories. I am delighted myself. Thank you for coming on to the show.
Thank you, Joshua.
And to all our audience and listeners out there, again, ajjacobs.com. Go check that out. Check out his book. Check out his Substack. Thank you for watching the episodes, and we will see you on the next one. Bye bye.
All right, so here's the thing. We try to get a little bit better every day, but we can't do it without you. So if you like the video, make sure to like and subscribe below. And if you have any comments, just leave them in the space under.